At a bustling airport, a millionaire's accidental hug with a stranger sets off a chain reaction of danger, deception, and destiny. What starts as a simple misunderstanding quickly spirals into a high-stakes game of corporate conspiracies, kidnappings, and life-altering choices. As Adrian Kane risks everything to help Clara save her daughter, he discovers that this chance encounter might just be the key to saving himself. But in a world where trust is a luxury and every secret has a price, will their accidental meeting lead to love or destruction? So stay tuned and watch it till end to find out where their meeting lead to love or destruction. Welcome back to Tales with Secos. Today, I am going to share an exciting story with you. The airport was a cacophony of hurried footsteps, rolling suitcases, and muffled announcements echoing through the cavernous terminal. Somewhere amidst the chaos stood Adrian Kane, a man whose tailored navy blue suit and Rolex screamed success, but whose harried expression betrayed exhaustion. At 42, Adrian had built an empire from nothing, a tech conglomerate worth billions. But today, he felt like just another faceless traveler navigating the labyrinthine corridors of O'Hare International Airport. Adrian's flight to London had been delayed for hours due to a freak storm over the Atlantic, leaving him stranded in a sea of impatient passengers. His phone buzzed incessantly with emails and calls from his assistant, investors, and board members, all demanding answers about the latest product launch that had gone sideways. He ignored them all, opting instead to scroll mindlessly through social media as a distraction. But even that offered little solace. Every post seemed to remind him how disconnected he'd become from the world outside his gilded cage. As Adrian finally approached Gate 37, clutching his carry-on bag and a crumpled boarding pass, something, or rather someone, barreled into him without warning. Before he could react, two arms wrapped tightly around his torso in what could only be described as a full-bodied hug. For a split second, Adrian froze, unsure whether this was some bizarre prank or an act of desperation. Then reality snapped back into focus. A young woman, her face buried against his chest, was sobbing uncontrollably. "I'm so sorry," she stammered, pulling away abruptly. Her cheeks flushed crimson as she wiped tears from her eyes with trembling hands. "I thought you were someone else." Adrian blinked, momentarily stunned. The woman before him couldn't have been more than 30, with unruly chestnut curls spilling out of a messy bun and wide hazel eyes framed by smudged mascara. She wore a faded leather jacket and jeans that looked like they'd seen better days, a stark contrast to Adrian's polished appearance. Despite her disheveled state, there was something undeniably magnetic about her, an authenticity that made her stand out in the sterile environment of the airport. "It's fine," Adrian said quickly, forcing a polite smile. "No harm done." But the encounter lingered in his mind long after she disappeared into the crowd. There was something hauntingly familiar about her, though he couldn't quite place why. Perhaps it was the raw vulnerability in her voice, or the way her embrace had felt strangely comforting despite its accidental nature. Whatever it was, Adrian found himself glancing over his shoulder as he boarded the plane, half expecting to see her again. Hours later, seated in first class with a glass of scotch in hand, Adrian tried to shake off the strange encounter. Yet as the plane soared above the clouds, his thoughts drifted back to the woman at the gate. Who was she? Why had she mistaken him for someone else? And why did her presence feel like a missing puzzle piece he hadn't realized was absent? When the plane touched down in Heathrow, Adrian stepped off feeling unsettled, a sensation he wasn't accustomed to. As CEO of one of the largest tech companies in the world, he prided himself on control. Every decision, every move was calculated, but this was different. It gnawed at him, refusing to let go. His business trip proved uneventful, filled with meetings that blurred together in a haze of PowerPoint presentations and handshakes. By the time he returned to Chicago 3 days later, Adrian had almost convinced himself the incident at the airport was inconsequential, a fleeting moment of human connection in an otherwise impersonal existence. Almost. It wasn't until he arrived home late that evening that everything changed. Sitting on his kitchen counter was an envelope addressed to him in elegant cursive handwriting. Puzzled, Adrian opened it to find a single sheet of paper inside. "Dear Mr. Kane, I owe you an apology. What happened at the airport was unintentional, but I believe it may have saved me. If you're willing to hear my story, please meet me tomorrow at noon at Café Solstice near Millennium Park. No strings attached. Sincerely, Clara." Adrian stared at the note, his pulse quickening. How did she know his name? More importantly, what did she mean by saved her? Curiosity got the better of him, and by noon the next day, he found himself seated at a corner table in Café Solstice, nursing a cup of black coffee while scanning the room for any sign of Clara. She arrived precisely on time, dressed more casually than before, but no less striking. Her hair was tied back neatly now, and her eyes held a quiet determination that intrigued Adrian. Without preamble, she slid into the seat across from him and began speaking. "My name is Clara Bennett," she said, her voice steady despite the nervous twitch of her fingers around the strap of her purse. "And I need your help." Adrian raised an eyebrow, leaning back in his chair. "Help with what?" Clara hesitated, then reached into her bag and pulled out a photograph. She slid it across the table toward him. It showed a young girl, no older than 10, smiling brightly under the sun. "This is my daughter, Lily. She's missing." Adrian's stomach dropped. "Missing? Since when?" 3 weeks ago, Clara replied, her voice cracking slightly. "She vanished after school. The police haven't found anything substantial, and I've hit a dead end. But—" She paused, glancing around the cafe before lowering her voice. "I think someone powerful is involved. Someone who doesn't want her found." Adrian frowned, skepticism creeping into his expression. "Why come to me? I'm not a detective." "No," Clara admitted, "but you're rich, influential, and resourceful. You have access to things most people don't, including information. Please, Mr. Kane, I wouldn't ask if I had any other options." Something in her tone struck a chord within Adrian. Maybe it was the desperation laced with hope, or maybe it was the faint echo of his own loneliness reflected in her eyes. Whatever it was, he nodded slowly. "All right," he said. "Tell me everything." What followed was a whirlwind of revelations that left Adrian questioning everything he thought he knew about power, privilege, and morality. Clara explained that Lily had been targeted because of her father, a whistleblower who had uncovered evidence of corporate corruption involving several high-profile companies, including one dangerously close to Adrian's own firm. The details were murky, but the implication was clear. Whoever took Lily wanted leverage, and they weren't afraid to use her as collateral. Over the next few days, Adrian threw himself into helping Clara, using his connections to dig deeper into the case. Along the way, their relationship evolved from reluctant allies to something far more complicated. Clara challenged Adrian in ways no one ever had, forcing him to confront the emptiness of his wealth and the isolation it bred. In turn, Adrian provided Clara with the resources and support she desperately needed, becoming a pillar of strength in her darkest moments. But just as they began closing in on Lily's whereabouts, a shocking twist threw everything into chaos. A private investigator hired by Adrian uncovered evidence suggesting that Clara herself might not be entirely innocent. Was she manipulating him, using his guilt and loneliness to further her own agenda? Or was there another layer to the conspiracy that neither of them had anticipated? As trust frayed and secrets unraveled, Adrian faced the ultimate dilemma: continue pursuing the truth, even if it meant risking everything, including his life, or walk away and return to the safety of his insulated world. Little did he know, the answer would force him to redefine not only who he was, but also what love truly meant. Adrian stared at the dossier in his hands, the words blurring as disbelief warred with suspicion. The private investigator's findings painted a damning picture. Clara had ties to an underground network of activists known for exposing corporate corruption. Worse still, her late husband, Lily's father, had been more than just a whistleblower. He was allegedly orchestrating a massive data leak that would implicate some of the most powerful figures in the world, including those uncomfortably close to Adrian's inner circle. "Is this true?" Adrian asked, his voice low but laced with tension. They were seated in his penthouse apartment, the city lights twinkling like distant stars outside the floor-to-ceiling windows. Clara sat across from him, her expression unreadable. "Yes," she admitted after a long pause, her hazel eyes meeting his without flinching. "But not in the way you're thinking." Adrian leaned forward, his jaw tightening. "Then explain it to me, Clara, because right now, I'm struggling to see how any of this doesn't make you complicit." Clara sighed, running a hand through her hair. For the first time since they'd met, she looked vulnerable. Not the fiercely determined woman who had walked into Café Solstice days earlier, but someone weighed down by secrets too heavy to bear alone. My husband wasn't just gathering evidence, she began, her voice trembling slightly. He was building a case, airtight proof of illegal activities spanning decades. But before he could release it, he disappeared. And then Lily, she trailed off, swallowing hard. I didn't know about the full scope of what he was doing until after he was gone. All I've been trying to do is protect my daughter and finish what he started. And yet you didn't tell me any of this, Adrian shot back, frustration creeping into his tone. You let me believe you were just a scared mother looking for her child. I needed your help, Clara said sharply, her composure cracking. Do you think I wanted to drag you into this mess? Do you think I had a choice? You're the only person with the resources and influence to stand up to these people. If I told you everything up front, would you have even listened? Her words hit their mark, piercing through Adrian's anger. He sank back into his chair, rubbing his temples as the weight of the situation settled over him. She was right. He wouldn't have believed her if she'd come clean from the start. Hell, he barely believed her now. But deep down, something about Clara's story resonated with him. Perhaps it was the desperation in her voice or the way she refused to look away when confronted. Whatever it was, it made him hesitate. All right, Adrian said finally, his voice softer but still guarded. Let's say I believe you. What's the next step? Clara exhaled, relief washing over her face. We find Lily, and we expose the truth. Their search led them to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, a location pinpointed by the investigator based on intercepted communications. It was a risky move, breaking into enemy territory without backup, but neither Adrian nor Clara had the luxury of waiting. Time was running out. As they crept through the dimly lit corridors, the air thick with dust and decay, Adrian couldn't shake the feeling they were being watched. Every shadow seemed to shift. Every creak of the floorboards echoed louder than it should have. When they finally reached the room where Lily was supposedly being held, what they found stopped them cold. The space was empty save for a single laptop resting on a table in the center of the room. On its screen was a live video feed showing Lily sitting in a brightly lit cell, her small frame hunched over as she clutched a stuffed rabbit to her chest. A message scrolled across the bottom of the screen. You're too late. Before either of them could react, the sound of footsteps echoed behind them. Adrian spun around, his heart pounding, to see three men stepping out of the shadows. They were dressed in black tactical gear, their faces obscured by masks. One of them held a gun aimed squarely at Clara. Drop whatever you're carrying, the leader ordered, his voice devoid of emotion. And don't try anything stupid. Adrian hesitated, his mind racing. He glanced at Clara, who stood frozen beside him, her eyes wide with fear. Slowly, he raised his hands, dropping the flashlight he'd been holding. Beside him, Clara did the same. Who sent you? Adrian demanded, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. The man smirked beneath his mask. That's not your concern. What matters is that you're going to walk away from here and forget you ever saw us, or your friend here gets a bullet between the eyes. Clara's breath hitched, but she forced herself to speak. You won't get away with this, she spat, her voice trembling but defiant. Someone will stop you. The leader chuckled darkly. No one's stopping us. Not you, not your dead husband, and certainly not him. He gestured toward Adrian with the barrel of his gun. Now, move. Adrian's mind raced. There had to be a way out of this, some opening, some chance to turn the tables. As the men ushered them toward the exit, he caught sight of a loose pipe jutting out from the wall near the door. It was a long shot, but it might be their only chance. With a sudden burst of movement, Adrian grabbed the pipe and swung it with all his strength, catching the leader off guard. The gun clattered to the ground as the man stumbled backward, clutching his injured arm. Chaos erupted as the other two men lunged at Adrian, but Clara seized the moment, grabbing the fallen weapon and firing a warning shot into the air. Don't move, she shouted, her voice shaking but commanding, or I swear, I'll shoot. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. The men hesitated, clearly unprepared for Clara's unexpected defiance. Seizing the opportunity, Adrian tackled one of them to the ground, while Clara kept the other two at bay with the gun. Within moments, the tide had turned. They subdued the attackers, tying them up with duct tape scavenged from a nearby workbench. Breathing heavily, Adrian turned to Clara, who was still gripping the gun tightly. Are you okay? He asked, his voice tinged with concern. She nodded, though her hands were visibly trembling. Yeah, let's find Lily. Using the laptop as a guide, they traced the video feed to another location, a secluded estate hidden deep within the countryside. By the time they arrived, dawn was breaking, painting the horizon in hues of orange and pink. The mansion loomed ahead, its grandeur marred by an aura of menace. "This is it," Clara whispered, her voice barely audible. "She's in there." Adrian placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We'll get her back, together." They moved cautiously through the grounds, avoiding patrols and security cameras. Inside, the house was eerily quiet, its opulent halls lined with priceless art and artifacts. Finally, they reached the basement, where Lily was being held. When they opened the door, Lily looked up, her eyes widening in shock. "Mommy," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Clara rushed to her side, pulling her into a tight embrace. "It's okay, sweetheart. You're safe now." But their reunion was short-lived. Footsteps echoed above them, growing louder with each passing second. Someone knew they were there. "We need to go, now," Adrian urged, glancing nervously toward the stairs. As they made their way back through the house, they encountered resistance, armed guards blocking their path. Outnumbered and outgunned, it seemed impossible to escape. But then, unexpectedly, reinforcements arrived. A team of federal agents stormed the mansion, led by none other than Adrian's head of security, Marcus. "Mr. Kane, we received your tip-off," Marcus called out, motioning for his team to secure the area. Adrian stared at him in disbelief. "My tip-off?" Marcus nodded. "You sent us coordinates and intel hours ago, didn't you?" Realization dawned on Adrian. The private investigator must have forwarded the information to Marcus after realizing the gravity of the situation. Relief washed over him as the agents took control of the scene, arresting everyone involved. In the aftermath, the truth came to light. Clara's husband had indeed uncovered a vast conspiracy involving multiple corporations, including one linked to Adrian's company. While Adrian hadn't been directly implicated, the scandal rocked his empire to its core, forcing him to reevaluate his priorities and ethics. As for Clara and Lily, they disappeared from public view shortly after the rescue, entering witness protection to ensure their safety. But before they left, Clara saw Adrian out one final time. "I owe you everything," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. "You risked your life for us." "Why?" Adrian smiled faintly, his gaze softening. "Because sometimes we need to be reminded of what really matters. And because..." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Because maybe saving you saved me too." Clara nodded, understanding flickering in her eyes. Then without another word, she turned and walked away, Lily's hand clasped tightly in hers. Weeks later, Adrian stood on the balcony of his penthouse, watching the city below buzz with life. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of peace, a quiet contentment that came not from wealth or power, but from knowing he'd done the right thing. Somewhere out there, Clara and Lily were starting anew, free from the shadows that had haunted them. And though their paths might never cross again, Adrian knew one thing for certain. That accidental hug at the airport had changed his life forever.